Hello, welcome to Business Statistics and Excel Lab 2. So this is the second course in the two-course sequence. So many of you were just taking the Stat 1 course and the Excel 1 course, so this should all be very familiar to you. This is an introductory video to the course for summer 2025. So I'm in the materials folder, or panel. So let's start with the syllabus and the textbook. So I have an old version of the textbook here. This should be sufficient for you. You probably don't need to buy the latest version of the textbook. But let's take a look at the syllabus. Okay, so here's my email, and you can just call me Sam, and my office hours will be over Zoom. But this is BA 351, so this is the second in a two-course sequence dealing with business statistics. So the first course, which we just took, was focused more on, say, probability, distributions, descriptive statistics, how do we visualize data, things like that. This course is now going to be probably the more useful part to you. So if you're doing research for, say, a senior thesis, or whenever you're working a job, if you're working with data, this is going to be a little more useful to you. So we're still going to acquire data processing skills with Excel, but also be doing more inferential statistics. So if we have a data and we have a research question, how can we go about answering that? And depending on what the question is and what the data looks like, that'll affect the way we approach the question. And so those are the skills we're really trying to develop in this class. So a little bit more useful, hopefully more interesting to you if you didn't enjoy the first course quite as much. And probably less math. So probability tends to be more math heavy. This is going to be leaning more on what the computer can do. So we want to understand some inference. So starting with single sample hypothesis testing, we're going to review that chapter. So that's chapter 9, and then be moving on into more advanced procedures. So going into two sample, and then looking at things like chi-square, regression analysis of variance, things like that. So we want to know how can we calculate these statistics, and also how can we interpret them and communicate them to others. So let's take a look. So this is an online class. It's going to be 6 weeks. So we're pretty much going to be doing one chapter per week. So it's still going to move quite fast. But if you were just in the Stat 2 course, this will feel a much more relaxed pace. For Stat 1, we needed to do 2 chapters per week. But here we're just going to do 1 chapter per week. So this is all online, and it's going to be asynchronous. So you do things at your own pace other than meeting the certain deadlines that are on Schoology. So my office hours will just be by appointment on Zoom. So if you want to talk to me, if you're having issues with the problem sets, just send me an email. I can either answer your question over email, or we can hop on a Zoom to do an office hour and get things sorted out that way. So required materials, there is this textbook. I wouldn't actually say this is too required. I have that older edition on Schoology, and I think that'll be sufficient. But the important thing that you need to do, the first thing to do, is to make sure you have access to Microsoft Excel on your computer. So just make sure you can access that, because that's going to be a key component of this course, because this is a 4-credit course, 3 credits of statistics, 1 credit of Excel. So make sure you have access to that. So grading, this is probably very familiar to almost all of you. So we'll have discussion questions. So here I'm just hoping that you read the material and respond to the prompt in your own words. So I'm not really looking for correctness here so much as just effort. And I do ask that you limit your ChatGPT usage here. If you just put in effort, you'll get full credit. So there's really no need to use ChatGPT. But if you do use it, don't just copy and paste using its words, because if I catch that, I'm not going to give credit. So if you're going to use it, use it in a conversational form, and then, use your own words to answer the prompt, because there's really no need to just have AI do it for you. That kind of defeats the point of the exercise. But for each chapter, there will be a discussion question. So again, more just on completeness rather than accuracy. And then self-assessment questions. So these are just little quizzes, 10 questions typically. And you'll get 2 chances to answer the question. So you really should always be able to get a perfect or very close to a perfect on these. And then finally, there will be a weekly problem set. So these will be more involved. There's one per week. It'll involve using Excel, answering questions, taking relevant statistical output, interpreting the output you have, and making sure that we answer the question that's asked in the problem. Finally, there will be one cumulative final exam, and that'll be available the final weekend of the course, which I believe is August 9th and 10th. So I'll provide more details on that later on. But basically, the exam will be posted to you, and you'll have, say, like 90 minutes to answer all the questions on that. So that's the class. So discussion and self-assessment questions, these are designed if you just put in the effort. This is pretty much a guaranteed 40%. The more challenging part of the course are the problem sets and the final exam. So the problem sets will take some time, and these will also be the basis for your grade for BA 351A. That is the Excel component to the STAT course. So the problem sets will be 30% of your grade for STATS 2, that is BA 351, and the problem sets will be 100% of your grade for BA 351A, that being Excel Lab 2. So they're really important. It's really important that you do all of them and try to submit those on time. And like I say, if you have issues, feel free to reach out. My schedule's flexible and I'm happy to help. Okay, so grading scheme, it's pretty typical. You've probably seen these before. Other class policies. With the late assignments, I just appreciate communication. If you need to turn something in late, I just appreciate if you let me know ahead of time. That way I won't deduct any points for late assignments, but if it just is submitted late and you don't let me know, there's going to be a late penalty for that. Moving on to the course outline. So this is 6 weeks. So the first week is the only week where we're covering 2 chapters. That's chapters 9 and 10. But if you just took Stat 1, Chapter 9 is going to be a review for you. So it shouldn't actually feel like a huge workload. But we're including Chapter 9 here because if you didn't just take Stat 1, it's good to get a refresher on that before we move on to the more advanced topics. So after this week, it's just 1 chapter per week. So chapters 11, 12, 13, and 14. And then the final week, there's actually no assignments, no homeworks, no new content, no chapters. It's just a chance to study for the final exam. And if you are behind on any assignments and you want to submit late assignments, that'll be your chance to kind of get caught up because taking zeros on the problem sets will be really bad for your grade. It's always worth turning in a late assignment. All right, well, I think that's it for the syllabus. So let's just go back to our materials folder. So that was syllabus and textbook. There will be a week folder or a folder per week showing everything that's due. So if we go into that folder, you'll note there's always an outline for that week. The outline will give us all the information we need. So week 1 is June 30th to July 6th. We're going to cover chapters 9 and 10. Here's a link to the videos, the lecture videos. So you're watching the introduction video right now. And then to cover the stat content for chapters 9 and 10. And then we've got some Excel lab videos. So this is where I'm going to walk through how to use Microsoft Excel, and you can walk through the steps with me. And that way the homework assignments should be pretty easy. And then we've got our due date. So because this is a 2-chapter week, we've got something due most days. So we've got our chapter 9 discussion question and SAQ, and then chapter 10 discussion and SAQ. And then finally, every Sunday at the end of the week, the problem set will be due for that week. So this is the big one. So just make sure you're staying on top of these things. If you stay on top of the discussion and SAQs, like that's going to be great for your grade. And then, like I said, the problem sets, you don't want to take zeros on those. So try not to fall behind on them. But the outline contains all the information you need for that week. And then we're doing 2 chapters. So let's just look at chapter 9. So we've got a PowerPoint. So this is a great reference for some notes. These are my handwritten notes, what I go through in the lecture videos, so I can kind of show calculations by hand and try to make sense of these things. These are some other reference files that we'll probably go through in the lecture videos. And then we've got our discussion question and SAQ. So this is due Tuesday and Wednesday. So the discussion question, you'll just click on that. There will be a little link or a little prompt, and you'll just respond to that, type in your answer, and then your SAQ. So this will be a series of questions, true, false, multiple choice. Make sure you just get that done by the due date. Okay, so chapter 10 would look very similar with the notes and the assignments, and then we have our Excel practice. So in some of those lecture videos where I'm talking about Microsoft Excel, I'll be working through this confidence interval and hypothesis testing file to begin with, and I'll be doing all these different exercises. So if you want to download this file and work along with me, that would be really helpful. And then I also just have the final filled out version for you. And then this is another reference file. This will be helpful for you for the problem set due at the end of the week. And then finally, the problem set. So this is where you'll submit the problem set. This is the problem set itself. And then this is the data that you'll need to answer all of the questions. So you'll just download these two files, and then for each problem set, you're going to submit two files. One is the Word document that includes all of your written answers, and your Excel file that includes all of your calculations and statistical output. All right, so that is what each week is going to look like, and that's pretty much it. So you've got your assignment due dates listed over here for this first week. Depending on how quickly you all move through the content, I might post future weeks ahead of time if you feel inclined to get ahead in the course. You can also just let me know if you want things to go a little bit faster. Otherwise, I'll be releasing, say, week 2 this Saturday or Sunday. So if you're already ahead by that point, you can get a head start on that. Otherwise, that's all I have for the class. So I look forward to working with all of you, and I'll see you soon.